The political left has never understood that if you give the government enough power to create social justice, you have given them enough power to create despotism. Millions of people around the world have paid with their lives for overlooking that very simple fact. Welcome to Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone. Today, I have Isabella Riley returning. Miss Riley, you are on Twitter. Are you on any alternative media sites that people should check out for when the inevitable happens?
And so I am on Parler and Gab as well, at Isabella Riley USA, and then Twitter is where I'm the most active, which is at Isabella Riley US. And again, I'm also on Instagram, TikTok, Isabella Riley USA. So yeah.
Are you still doing TikToks?
Yeah, no, I still do TikToks. I'm all the real, or like I post my TikToks like Twitter and Instagram for real. So I record all my videos through TikTok. I love TikTok. I don't like Instagram. I think Instagram's, I hate the app. I think it's annoying. I like TikTok way more. So yeah, I do still use TikTok.
You know what? I've liked TikTok just because I'm like, all right, in the shortest amount of time, can someone grab my attention and make a good point, be entertaining? And I'm like, never let down. It's just like, it's like Vine, which I miss terribly.
I never used Vine.
Oh, and that was incredible because it was only 6 seconds. So the fact that people could come up with such creative things in 6 seconds would just blow my mind.
Right. It truly is crazy. Yeah, I totally agree. I never used Vine though.
Yeah, it's addicting. So today we are going to address something that is problematic called Blue Anon. For those of you who aren't familiar with Blue Anon, this is a loosely organized network of Democratic voters, politicians, and media personalities who spread left-wing conspiracy theories. Blue Anon adherents fervently believe that a right-wing extremist organization is going to storm the Capitol Hill any day now to remove lawmakers, some maybe even murder some lawmakers, hence the need for deployment of thousands of National Guard troops stationed at the U.S. Capitol. They just gave another $1.9 billion to the Capitol Police because, oh, it's going to happen any day now, tell us, say the conspiracy theorists. When you hear Blue Anon and think of the craziest nonsense that the left believes, what comes to mind?
I mean, I definitely would like exactly what you were saying, that any day there's going to be some right-wing takeover, a real insurrection after the, if January 6th was an insurrection, why would there need to be another one? I thought it was an insurrection. Clearly it wasn't, but that's definitely where I feel like where it really started. I mean, the idea that January 6th was an insurrection. I mean, now there's video footage coming out of police officers saying, yeah, you guys can come inside as long as you're peaceful. So they like let these people come inside. And, the difference between the January 6th riot and, all the BLM riots is at least these people were, going after or trying to talk to, and they were taking their anger out on the people that were actually guilty of what they're alleging, unlike the BLM riots that were attacking, private business owners and their businesses and people that had nothing to do with their so-called grievances. So I would definitely say the insurrection. I can't believe I keep hearing that, tomorrow apparently there's going to be another insurrection, and that's why we need all these Capitol police officers everywhere, and we need, is there still a wall going around in DC right now? Remember there was like some wall?
Yeah, it looked like it was like Petrograd in the Soviet Union, or I think it's Leningrad now, but where it's like it's completely surrounded. Only the politicians are allowed in, only the elite rule makers. It's like, well, maybe you guys should leave that up there so people don't keep thinking we are the government, but it still looks so tyrannical. Please take it down. As far as the riots go, well, I used this example on the day of. I said, if they are pissed at the government for the election or anything else, same thing the left was telling us, that there was a fraudulent 2016 election. The right was saying it too. And if their response was to go into vegan restaurants and book clubs or whatever businesses tend to be more left-wing, and they were rioting and looting, yes, they absolutely have the right to defend themselves. They're all terrorists. They're all violent criminals. They should be resisted by any proportional means that are justified. But that's not what happened. They went to the politicians. These are the biggest criminals. There was a great Jim Halpert meme. The Capitol insurrection was just a no-knock raid on the feds. It's like, talk about if there was ever a justification for a no-knock raid, a really dangerous person or group of people, can't think of anyone more. I can't think of anyone more deserving. So it's like, yeah, they had the courage to go after the actual problem, not Nike and the local restaurant.
Right, and it's kind of like these politicians, like they feel like they're invincible. The only thing that they're really beholden to is their reelection, is getting reelected. That's the only thing that they're nervous about, but they don't really think there's any consequences to their actions, to their lying. So I think it's like a good thing that it kind of scared politicians, but at the same time, it just gave them more of a justification for more increased tyrannical power and whatever. So that really does suck. But I guess the one like white pill moment with all of this is when the government takes things so far, it really does kind of red pill people and shows them like when they take it too far, more people are willing to rebel. And, you know, they think it's like you see the things happening in Canada where people are being like dragged out of their houses and stuff by police officers, kind of insane stuff. And you finally see people saying, hey, what's going on? The state has way too much power. Whereas if it's a little bit less, you know, people are more willing to comply. So there is some sort of positive outcome to this, as more people are waking up, you know, with the pictures after the election and after Joe Biden became president, with all like the walls. And it's like, oh, I thought the Democrats were against walls. I thought walls didn't work. So it kind of just really puts on display their blatant hypocrisy.
Exactly. So let's go through a number of problematic debunked conspiracy theories that the left believes in. Number one, comment on this one. Anyone who is not a leftist is very greedy and selfish and just wants to live at the expense of others. They're against taxation because they just want to hog up all the money, deprive everyone else of resources to the point where they starve to death, disproportionately groups that are not much like themselves, natives, people in foreign lands, and Blacks and women. How do you respond to anyone non-leftists are only non-leftists because they're evil and selfish?
Well, you know, it's so evil and selfish to want to keep your own money, and it's totally not evil and selfish and greedy to want to steal money from others. So, I mean, it's just a blatant, like, insane thing to say. And I also am against, you know, putting this one label and grouping a ton of people under one umbrella, especially something so ridiculous as this. But everything that the left accuses the right or anyone that's not leftist of being, they pretty much are. It's always projection. So it's such a blatant, insane thing to say. But that's something like I remember when I was in school, like younger growing up, you always heard that the Republicans were the greedy ones. The Democrats are the ones that care about the people. And Republicans are only like in favor of low taxes because they're greedy. They want to keep their money. They want people to starve on the streets. They don't care if someone's dying in the streets if they don't have health care. But it's totally a lie. And it's also inefficient because when you're giving all these people money, you keep them down because they want to keep getting the welfare checks and all this free stuff that's not really free. And then you're also removing the incentive for other people to thrive. So it's just a blatant conspiracy theory, and one of like the most foundational ones that I learned growing up.
So let's talk to the pro-science, pro-proof left. Here is a book written by Arthur C. Brooks titled "Who Really Cares?" This is someone reviewing the research. Brooks found that liberals view government redistribution as a form of charity, which they believe exonerates them from further giving. But it clearly is not the same thing. Charity is voluntary and taxation is not. In his research, Arthur C. Brooks found that of the states that gave the most to charity were more likely to be red states. So, well, maybe the blue people in those states, if you look closely, because they have this worldview, conservatives give a higher percentage of their own income compared to progressives every single year for the last 50 years on record. So, anything else to put to bed this debunked problematic conspiracy theory that anyone who doesn't believe the mass murdering government should rule us all is selfish?
I mean, what you just said is a great point. I mean, I've heard that too before. Republicans by and large tend to give way more of their own money to charities, and the difference between these welfare stuff and taxation is obviously done by force and coercion. Charity is voluntary, so that just the only way to do anything is morally is voluntarism. So that makes a ton of sense. But I think I was just about to say something and now I forgot it. And a lot of leftists will claim that everyone wants to contribute to these social programs and these welfare programs. Most people want to. Well, if that was the case, why do we need to make it forced? If this is something that we all want to happen, then you wouldn't need to make the state force it upon us. So that's obviously a lie. And if you really wanted to donate more money and give more money to charities and stuff, you can write it in on your tax form. Why don't you write in more money to the government? Why is that? No, you just want to force the government to steal money from others. You just want the government to steal from others. You don't really want, you don't even want to contribute to it. Most people don't want to contribute to taxes. That's why they get accountants to try to get out of paying the government as much as possible. So it's obviously all BS.
Next, Blue Anon debunked conspiracy theory. America is today an extremely racist country. The racism mainly takes form in whites oppressing blacks, Hispanics, and natives. How do you respond?
If we were such a racist country, then why do we get so many people from across the globe trying to immigrate here and start a life here? Like if you were, a black or a brown person, you would not want to come to the most racist country. So clearly that's just, actions speak louder than words. And also, I hate the term racist country. Like, a country is not racist. It's made up of a bunch of people. So you're saying the people that make up the country is racist. Well, how are we such a racist country when the biggest crime, or like the biggest, insult and attack of your character nowadays is to be accused of being racist? That's like the one thing you don't want to be, the worst among all. So if we were such a racist country, then why is that such a huge attack? And now racism is really a great way to make money. If you're someone like, what's his name? Colin Kaepernick, he's really thrived on saying the NFL doesn't want me because I'm black and blah, blah, blah. And, he has to kneel for the anthem and make it a big deal. So really racism sells. It's like, sex used to sell, now it's racism.
So I want to quote from Dave Rubin's book, Don't Burn This Book, on page 98. He says, if you're driving an automobile, you're going to want to pull over because this is rough. Black people are 23.5% less likely to be shot by police relative to whites. That's according to ex-Harvard scholar Roland Fryer, a black dude, I might add. He investigated racial profiling in his study, an empirical analysis of racial differences in police use of force, published in July 2017. A year earlier, a Washington State University paper, The Reverse Racism Effect, written by Lewis James, Stephen M. James, and Brian J. Villa, and published in May of 2016, Criminology and Public Policy Journal, found police were 3 times less likely to shoot unarmed black suspects than unarmed white suspects. What I get from that is BLM is actually having a difference, and riots actually have a difference, because cops are a little less trigger happy, or not even that, even if they are committing a crime. There was a cop who killed a woman who was stabbing another black woman, and LeBron James is like, oh, you're next. They can't even differentiate between justified and unjustified. Any response to, well, maybe it's not the average American, but it's systemic and it's built into the fabric of institutions.
Well, the only systemic racism I see right now is, affirmative action, if we're going to talk about systemic racism, but you point to me of one policy that really perpetuates systemic racism. You can't. And also, in terms of the police officers, if you put yourself in the shoes of a police officer, even if you are the most racist person that exists, the last thing you want to do is be a white police officer shooting a black person and be on the TV screen, become the next Derek Shaw. Like, do you want that? Obviously not. So even if you're racist, that's the last thing you want. So you really think these cops want this to happen?
Exactly. And it's such a fake problem. 93% of black victims were killed by other African Americans, while 84% of white victims were killed by other Caucasians. So it's mostly in race violence. I'm not sure what you would call that, but the point is that if I care about a demographics lives mattering, I couldn't focus on just a microscopic percentage. It's like, I want to expand the life expectancy of the human race. So I'm going to focus all my energy on lightning strikes that kill people. Well, no, you'd focus on cancer or heart disease or something like that. Then it would make sense. So for them to pick on something so small like this, as far as, do you go to a university now?
No, not anymore. No, but UMass Amherst, University of Massachusetts Amherst, very liberal, belly of the beast.
And how often would you say race was brought up in regards to a discussion where it didn't feel like it needed to be brought up?
Pretty much every discussion. Even some of my classes that I was a political science major, some of my classes that weren't even political science classes, I felt were more political than the political science ones. But yeah, it was always a factor into the equation. And it's pretty bad, because if race, sometimes, race could be a factor, but if it's really not the primary factor and that's what you're focusing on, it's pretty dangerous, because then you really aren't focusing on solving the actual issue. So in terms of things like mass incarceration, which obviously race played a part into it when it was a first thing. But for me, the problem, and this is where I differ with the woke libertarians, is they talk about how the main issue with that is racism and mass incarceration, where my thing is I'm against individual human beings being locked up in cages. I don't care what race you are, I'm against that. So I hate boiling everything down to race. I think it's stupid. Just because someone shares my skin tone doesn't mean we have anything in common. So it's stupid that we really judge people based on immutable characteristics, and goes against everything, Martin Luther King Jr. said. He wants to live in a society where his kids can be judged based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin, which is antithetical to everything the woke left is now pushing.
Exactly. I mean, like the mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, just said that she won't be giving white interviews inside of her office. At what point do you not see that you are the very thing you think you're raging against? If you Google the word racism, you'll get prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism detected against a person or people based on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group. How do you not see that the left is the biggest perpetrator of bringing race into something as opposed to discussing things on principle? And then if you scroll down, I say Google this, even though I use Bing and DuckDuckGo, because right under the definition, you can see use over time for racism. I was going to put this up, but I think people need to experience this on their own. So look up this word and see how it was so seldom used from 1800 to 1950, and then a lot more in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and it's peaking in the year 2021, being talked about more so than before. Of course, you get big jumps in the year 2016 when there's a presidential election.
Right.
So as America is becoming less Jim Crow, fewer lynchings, fewer blacks enslaved, you're talking about this more. What I think this is simply a fake problem that is so easy to address. Racism equals bad, but they don't understand it on principle. Why do you think the left is so obsessed with race and seeing everything through the lens of skin color?
Well, for one, like I said earlier, racism sells, and also it really does appeal to some emotional appeal to people, and it's something that people just get really emotional about. And I try to think about things logically, and I remove myself from that, but I just think it's an easy way to, attract emotional voters. So that's pretty much it. I think racism sells right now, as we can see with the trends as it's being mostly used now, when we're probably as least racist, at least in terms of systemic racism, as we've ever been.
Exactly. That they talk about it more once it's easy to talk about and nothing really matters and there's no progress. That's why they'll just say, this is problematic. And then that'll be their statement in its entirety.
Just point out the problem and that's it. No solution, no alternative. And they also they make these broad statements like Black Lives Matter. Well, yes, we all agree with that. They'll say racism bad. Right. We all agree with that. It's like saying, water is wet. Water is wet. They just make these statements that make it so hard for someone to disagree with them, because then it's like, oh, so you're in favor of racism if you're against Black Lives Matter. You don't think Black Lives Matter? No, I think the organization is wrong. I agree with the statement Black Lives Matter. Obviously, all lives matter, whatever. But they just make these broad statements that are impossible to disagree with. And they'll say, like I've said, I had a lot of people on TikTok, if I ever say anything about Antifa, they'll say Antifa is just an idea, which is insane. Then they'll also say, oh, so you don't like Antifa, so you're a fascist. Like, they just blindly believe whatever anyone tells them. They don't even judge them based on their actions at all. It's very insane.
It's ridiculous. You have been very vocal against the idea of feminism. What do you consider feminism, and why are you an anti-feminist?
So feminism today has nothing to do with equality. It has everything to do with female supremacy, or they're trying to erase gender as overall. They keep contradicting themselves. That's why I hope as a movement it won't ever really survive. But what I see with feminism, especially on TikTok, is it just promotes women to be as ugly as possible. They want them, like I see girls on TikTok with, hairy armpits. They look like bushes. They're hairier than any man's armpits I've ever seen. They dance with their armpits out. They'll brush their armpit hair. It's really disgusting. But they make women feel like, let's be as ugly as possible. They also tell them that, you don't want to start a family. You don't need a man. Like, just marry your corporate job. That's what will make you happy. And then it leads women down a life of misery, because by the time they're 40 or something and they can no longer have kids, you can't backtrack. You can't rewind these things. You do have a time frame where you can when you can get pregnant and start a family. So I think it's really toxic and leading girls and women down a really miserable path of life. I also think that look, they always claim, feminists will claim that they're pro women's right to choose, but it's only to choose what they want them to do. So if you choose to be a stay-at-home mom, if you choose to be liberty-minded, pro-life, pro-gun, whatever, they're against you. Feminists, the reason I attack them so much is because they attack me so much on TikTok. They're like the main hate comments I get. That's why I love trolling them so much, because it's so easy. But they can't stand, like, they feel so betrayed by women who reject everything that feminism stands for. So it's just a terrible thing and cancer on our society.
Exactly. Carrie Wedler just made a great video about how it's good to be pro-choice, my body, my choice, except if you want to start a business. Well, then there's thousands of regulations you got to comply with. That's not your choice. Unless you want to purchase something from someone and the state hasn't said that that's okay, or there's some trade barrier or any restrictions. Or if you don't want to chip in for the welfare state, that's not allowed. You don't want to chip in for the welfare state, that's not allowed. You want to send your kids to a school that is unlicensed, well, that is not allowed. You have to get a license from the state, or else it's not called a school. And you're in, what were I think it's called truancy legislation, is what Kamala Harris was like proud that she enforced in as Attorney General in California. It's incredible. Yeah, that's a great point, that they only support, quote, choice when it's something they already wanted them to do in the first place.
Right.
Which is totally contrary to what a choice actually is.
Exactly.
Dave Rubin says on page 100, the war on women. Some of these are things that I've added. So he mentions that women dominate universities, and women are also much less likely to be victims of homicide. A 2013 study by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime found that nearly 80% of murder victims were male. He also mentions 95% of police killings are male. 70% of homeless people are male. He doesn't mention circumcision, but that's something that, the MRA activists are always calling it genital mutilation. The draft, of course, forced labor. That's another fancy word for slavery. 93.3% of federal inmates are male. As far as life expectancy goes, 76 for men, 81 for women. As far as getting custody, 1 in 6 full-time custody parents are fathers. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says 4,492 men died at work in 2015, 92.9% of the total compared with women. Now, he then clarifies, which he does so correctly, statistical disparity doesn't always mean discrimination. Sometimes, more often than not, they are the reward for life choices, which is fair. So just because men are 95.5% of police killings, well, men commit the most amount of violence and they resist arrest more often, or they run away, which doesn't mean it's good. I'm just saying that that's an explanation for the disparity. Any final thoughts on feminism and the gender life gap?
Right. So, I mean, exactly. And something I've always said growing up is I don't understand what feminists are complaining about. I've been a woman my whole life, and I feel like it's brought me nothing but privileges. And obviously, there's different privileges that both men and women get to enjoy. And that's just the way of life. And that's just how it is. And there's nothing more to it. I don't know. So, yeah, that's all I have to say.
Well, and then the female or the gender wage gap is just so cruel. I mean, they push this and they have to know that it's BS, considering I think it was Hillary Clinton's office had the same gender wage gap that the economy does, because the men worked longer hours and had different positions and had more experience and were willing to travel more and take on more risk. That's why they're more likely to die, because the jobs are riskier, so they have to pay more. It's just so cruel and divisive.
Actions. These are just consequences to actions. It's as simple as that.
It's as evil as going around saying the Asian white wealth gap. Asians just earn more money. They just earn more, and there's no reason. It's just because you're being discriminated. Old people earn more than younger people just because there's ageism. Well, there's a lot of other factors. They have different jobs, work different hours, etc.
That's right, exactly.
As far as gun control goes, what do you have to say to someone on the left who might see gun control as a mechanism for society keeping itself safe from people who otherwise might engage in violence?
Well, one thing is so you want the only people to be able to have guns and have any way to protect themselves as being the state. That's one thing that's pretty scary, a scary thought. But also, a lot of the times, all these gun control measures would not even stop these crimes that end up happening and these atrocities that we end up seeing. Like in terms of school shootings, I think the best solution would be have like an armed police officer, or like teach the teachers how to, use a gun and properly use it to defend themselves. The best way to combat these terrible atrocities that happen is when you have someone that actually knows how to use a gun and can defend themselves. It's also obviously unconstitutional. We have a Second Amendment right to have guns and protect ourselves. So it's just insane. And I don't know what it is. Like the left, they're so insane because they will say that we don't want you to have a gun because it's dangerous. And then at the same time, so that means, okay, we can only rely on the cops to protect us. And at the same time, they want to defund the cops. So it's like, okay, so how are you going to protect yourselves? So, it's as simple as guns don't kill people, people kill people. If someone really wanted to kill someone and they couldn't get access to a gun, they could find other ways to do it. You can use a car. You can use, there's many other ways to kill people. And then, yeah, I feel like there's something else I was going to say. Maybe it'll come back to me, but.
Well, we just oppose the state monopolizing guns. There are some people who it's best not for, so you should embrace the pro-choice position. A lot of people don't want guns. They feel safe. They have alarm systems. They have heavy locks. They're so scared that someone else is going to use it. They feel it's heavy and it shoots out fast and that's risky. So don't freaking have one.
Right.
But the problem is they want the state to use their guns to come and violently confiscate the guns from peaceful people.
Right.
So Dave Rubin, page 106, he quotes an article from the New York Times, January of 2016, and the article's titled, credit where it's due, Some Inconvenient Gun Facts for Liberals. It says, the number of guns in America has increased by 50% since 1993, while the number of gun-related homicides has fallen by 50% in the exact same period. The idea that more guns equals more crime is just false. It's just a lie. So for the pro-facts, pro-science people, not exactly engaged in a lot of facts, logic, and science. Anything else you have on gun control?
Nope, that's pretty much it. Yep. Shocker that they aren't really following the science and statistics. Shocker.
The next one Rubin gets into is environmental issues. Paul Ehrlich being the major scientific leftist in the 1960s. So just as he was there, Tony Fauci back then with his book, The Population Bomb. In the 1970s, hundreds of millions of people will starve to death in spite of any crash programs embarked on now. He wrote, at this late date, nothing can prevent a substantial increase in the world death rate. So that was science, by the way, so make sure not to question it. Rubin then quotes humanprogress.org. World population increased from 4.4 billion to 7.5 billion between 1980 and 2017, yet resources have become more abundant by 379.6% to be precise. As far as extreme weather goes, global warming, global cooling, climate change, this one's big. The world's death rate from extreme weather is lower than it's ever been in any decade since 1900. From 1920 to 1929, there were 241 deaths per million people, but that figure reduced to 5.4 deaths per million between 2000 and 2010. This includes deaths by everything from hurricanes to floods and extreme temperatures. So we have the food shortage hoax and the global warming is going to kill us and shorten our lives and start murdering us hoax. Any thoughts on how we can reach the left with the environment, or how we can just expose them to people willing to think clearly?
I mean, it's not difficult in the sense where there's actual data and statistics and, what we see today that can just quickly debunk all of these irrational claims, but they just simply don't want to listen to them. I mean, you'll still hear politicians like, AOC claim that in 10 to 12 years, the world will be ending. And it's so easily debunkable, but they just won't listen. So that's a great question. I don't know how you get through to them on these things that are so simple. And then also it's funny because the solutions are always the same. It's like the only solution to solve all of these problems is increasing the size of the state. Give us more of your money. Let's be way more controlling of your everyday lives. And that's always the solution. It's weird how they always have the same solution. Coincidence? I think not.
Of course, they just start with the answer. As far as it's incredible that this one's so similar. The 2016 election being stolen by Russian interference, they had Robert Mueller with millions of dollars. The entire media was on it. So if there was really some collusion and some massive interference, we certainly would have seen it. And then, without any sense of irony, they say that it's terrible to question the 2020 election. And now that there's an audit in Arizona, this is evil and it's un-American. Joe Scarborough says if you support this audit, you should leave the country. What are your thoughts on the 2016 election, the 2020 election, and election interference?
I mean, we're all such hypocrites. It's so funny. But I mean, 2016, it's kind of shocking. So the Democrats assumed that Trump must have done something. This is my take on it, that they assume that he must have done something corrupt. I mean, it's Donald Trump. They think he's evil. So obviously there was corruption. There's no way that he could have won and beat Hillary Clinton. They were so shocked. So they were saying, we have evidence of this. Adam Schiff was saying, I've seen it. It will come out soon. Just wait. And I think that they truly believed that they would find something, and they just didn't. And what's crazy, I was even shocked. I was like, damn, they really couldn't find anything on him? Like, this is kind of crazy. Like, he might be the least corrupt politician or president we've ever had at that time. I'm not sure if that's really true, but it's just kind of crazy how they really didn't find anything, and how, I mean, even his own FBI was against him. I mean, if you really think about, like, imagine if today's FBI was against Joe Biden investigating the 2020 election. Could you even picture that? You can't picture that. But that's how Trump was. Trump wasn't perfect, but he really didn't have everyone, even people within his own administration, working against him, which is crazy. And people will say, oh, he allows his family members to have too much power and stuff. And I'm like, well, I mean, if I were him, I wouldn't trust anyone. Like, who do you even trust when everyone's backstabbing you? So it's kind of understandable, not excusing it, but if you can put yourself in his position, you could see how frustrating and how untrustworthy everyone seems to be. But I mean, it's crazy how they couldn't find anything. The whole Mueller thing, when he actually testified, was shocking. You really learned to find out that he was just the face and front of the entire thing. They wanted to put someone that's like a Republican in the face of it, but everyone else, all the other lawyers, were all Democrat lawyers. What was the Wiseman, or Andrew Wiseman? He's like a Hillary Clinton, like literally a lawyer for Hillary Clinton, was like the main guy. I think his name's Andrew Weissman, could be wrong. And that was all a hoax. Obviously, they wasted what was like over 40 million tax dollars. It's so disgusting. So much of our time, so much of the news cycle. It was insane. And so many people bought onto it. It's pretty sad. And then also the 2020 election, I mean, now, of course, they're saying it's unpatriotic to even question the election. They love to use patriotism to whatever their narrative is, including the right, in terms of like wars and stuff with 9/11. But I mean, I don't know. How do you feel about the 2020 election? I actually I told my dad, he was like, no, Trump won 2016. He'll win 2020, no problem. And I said, I don't think they thought that he would win in 2016, so they didn't like try to do anything shady. But I think that they now know that there's a great chance he wins. So they were like being very calculative. And, Trump was always saying for months before, when COVID started, that they're going to steal the election with this mail-in voting. It's going to happen. And guess what? He wasn't saying that because he's some prophet. He can see into the future. He's some genius. It's because they were openly doing it in front of all of us. Unfortunately, he kind of just let it happen. But yeah, it's all crazy.
It's so hard to nail down. So let's look at how they're able to get lies widespread before they're actually refuted. So if you remember, it was Trump and Hillary's second debate where Hillary kept saying, Trump would say, well, your emails, you had them on a private server. And her response to, were your emails unclassified emails on a private server, making it a felony? Her response was, Russia is behind these hacks. So instead of answering it, she just says Russia, which is like, did you rob the bank? You probably found out from a Russian guy. Well, did you do it or did you not? I'm sure a Russian wants you to say that. It's just unbelievable that they'd say this.
So she is like just living the worst life ever, if not like being murdered at the moment, because he just exposed these things. It's like, how about let's get mad at? Like, everyone's mad about the messenger who just released this information, but they're not mad about what actually happened. They're just mad about him releasing the information to the public. It's so disgusting, this entire situation.
So if you remember, well, not to mention Obama's caught on a hot mic with a Russian guy saying, I'll have more flexibility after my second election. That was more collusion than anything I ever saw Trump say. And so Hillary's big thing was that 17 intelligence agencies, so that means they're intelligent, which is smart and accurate. 17 agencies have confirmed that these are from Russia. This was in the 2016 debates, and it wasn't until June 29th of 2017 that the New York Times came out and said, a White House memo article on Sunday about President Trump's deflections and denials about Russia referred incorrectly to the source of an intelligence assessment that said Russia orchestrated hacking attacks during last year's presidential election. The assessment was made by 4 intelligence agencies, NSA, CIA, FBI, DNI. The assessment was not approved by all 17 organizations in the American intelligence community. So first of all, big lie. They give you the scary number 17. And then they say it was actually only 4, the biggest liars on the planet. And where were the other 13 intelligence agencies coming out at the time saying, we never said that?
Right.
They're so corrupt and just
So
fake.
corrupt. You know, Trump really coined the term like the swamp, and it's so true. It really is the swamp, the DC swamp, and scary. It's kind of the same thing as they say, you know, they throw around the statistic 99% of scientists or whatever believe that climate change is a huge threat and it's caused by human action. And it just, when you actually look into it, it's not actually 90, it's just an assessment of some sort of group of scientists that this one paper kind of compared. And it's really, they throw out these big statistics and numbers to make it seem like there's some wide consensus that this must be, you know, the general opinion that we should agree with and not question it. But when you really investigate and dig into how they're actually coming up with these metrics and numbers, you realize that, oh, it's just a lot of BS. But most people are not skeptical enough and they don't question things enough to actually do the research and kind of look into what's coming, how these data statistics are even come to. So, yeah.
And I forgot about this blue Anon conspiracy theory until now, that remember when Trump was impeached for engaging in a quid pro quo with Ukraine. Did you ever see the video of Biden talking about, he's at the Council on Foreign Relations and he's like, so I got on the phone with the guy in Ukraine and I said, if you won't get the money until that guy is fired. And wouldn't you know it, son of a bitch was gone.
Yes. How?
That is a quid pro quo with Ukraine of all countries.
Like, it's so insane. It's as if it's like some satirical SNL skit, like reenactment of what's going on, because it seems so outlandish. But right, exactly what they accuse Trump of doing. A video is released of Joe Biden bragging about doing the exact same thing with the same country. Like, it's like too good to be true. But yet no one cares.
So this one I think might be the biggest because it's the easiest to refute. Are you familiar with the left saying that Donald Trump called Nazis fine people?
Never heard that before in my life.
You're kidding, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just making sure because that's what happens is they go from it's true, and then, oh, we never said that. So I've literally heard people, I'm not sure what you're talking about. I'm just caring about the 2022 elections and the Democrats keeping the House and the Senate. And I go, so you just lie and then move on and never apologize for the deception. So I'm just going to read it quick. When he had said, excuse me, they didn't put themselves down as neo-Nazis, and you had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very important statue and the renaming of the park from Robert E. Lee to another name. Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter have praised Robert E. Lee because Lee said we should end slavery. This way there's not a civil war. He was more anti-slavery than Lincoln was. Trump goes on, I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and white nationalists because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group, you had some fine people, but you also had troublemakers, and you see them come with black outfits with helmets and baseball bats. You had a lot of bad people in that group too. How is it they're able to keep such a blatantly false lie, which there's a video and transcript of, from circulating so millions of people believe an easily verifiable hoax? Blue Anon.
It's so insane because he explicitly condemns and targets and points out, I'm not talking about the Nazis. I'm not talking about the white supremacists. You know, that's not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about just people who didn't want the statue to be torn down. It's so explicit and undeniable. And I actually had a fight with a teacher in college about this, and we went back and forth like so many times. It was an online class, and in like the discussion chat, and it was like, oh my God, there's no getting through to him. I literally quoted him multiple times, linked the video. There's no getting through to these people. They want to believe what they want to believe, and that's why there's so many people you can't change their mind because they want to believe this. So there's no changing their mind.
This is a great litmus test for someone who you're like, well, should I be friends with this person? I know I don't totally agree with them, but let's see, can they at least believe or not believe something that is verifiably wrong? So I always recommend this one.
That's a good one. It's quickly debunked. It's a quick little test. I like it.
So a few more things. What are some lessons that libertarians and freedom-oriented people can learn from Donald Trump running on the offensive and running as a populist?
I just appealing to people's emotions and being so anti-elite, so anti-establishment. I think that's something that so many people, even like, that's why he got some Bernie voters. They were so anti-establishment. Yeah. They hated everything that Hillary Clinton, like, you know, and Republicans who like Bush's, like these, you know, these families, these legacy families that we just don't like. I think it's a great way to unite a lot of people that are anti-elite and establishment. So that, and I also think that his ability to just call out, you know, in his media press conferences, he just calls out the journalists for what they are. I think that's so important. I always say that, you know, I liked Trump for exactly the opposite reasons why most conservatives liked him. Most conservatives say, oh, I like his policies, but his rhetoric, his mean tweets, I don't really like that. Where I'm the opposite. I like his rhetoric. I like his tweets. I like his meaner the better. Like, that's what I like. I like that he puts, like, he really is good at coming up with phrases that stick. You know, the fake news media, the, you know, the corporate or the mainstream media, or the enemy of the people. These things that these being able to put a phrase to these just these concepts really make people allow people to conceptualize these things that they may have no longer conceptualized or thought about before. So that, and I mean, you really have to be, if you're going to make it in politics, especially to be president, you have to be charismatic. So, I mean, Gary Johnson was not charismatic, you know, like he was just kind of a joke, like such a, like, it's the Libertarian Party having these people run on the ticket is just, that's why it's a joke. And that's why I think there needs to be more of an alliance with the Republican Party and the populist conservatives. But yeah, is there anything that you think that he did really well that we should look at?
Yeah, calling them the enemy of the people, when you're saying the people, you're immediately uniting people together, and you're getting them against a common enemy well, I'm generally against collectivism and this sort of stuff. It's so clear that people use the media in order to engage in clickbait and pushing their agenda. So I see it as a totally legitimate tactic against a group of people who needs to be delegitimized, because people literally think, well, the TV said it, so I know it's true. You have to have some skepticism towards these tyrants. As far as a populist message goes, he certainly showed us the idea that populism are bringing people together based on a common trait that they all have: hatred of the elites, hatred of the media, sick and tired of, quote, establishment. Even though those are a little dumb and vague, what it really tells us is we could have a populist message based on there are two groups of people on the planet, people who achieve their ends in life voluntarily, whether it's where do I get lunch, how do I ask this girl out, versus what career do I want to have, and how should society function with helping the poor. All of these decisions can be done violently or voluntarily, and the violent people are uncivilized, they are primitive, and frankly, I want nothing to do with them. The voluntary people are civilized and cooperative, and I benefit and they benefit. And if one of us doesn't like it, we have the right, we have the God-given right, because we're made in God's image, to go somewhere else. And for someone to initiate violence against God's image is using violence against God. Something like that I could see as being a really, it just feels like it's right there. There's a principal difference.
I really like that.
In these interactions.
I think that's very well said. And I think that's like perfect, actually.
Michael Malice said, young, healthy people are saying they're afraid of COVID. They aren't afraid of dying. They're afraid of living. What are your thoughts on that?
Wow. He always comes up with really good, short little phrases that make so much sense. And that's so true. I mean, the weird thing about the youth today is you would think that the youth is more of a rebellious group. They say kind of crazy things, and they'll do kind of crazier things that are more dangerous. But there's this weird trend of people my age and younger to just blindly accept authority, and they think it's cool to be woke and tell people what they can and cannot say. And yeah, I mean, they aren't, yeah, you're right. People of my age are not scared of dying from COVID. They're just scared of being not socially accepted. So they'll post like a black square on Instagram to show that they're an ally to BLM because they don't want to be ostracized or, you know, being accused of being racist. So they're afraid of living their lives for truly who they are. And they just are willing to just blindly accept this woke left narrative. And it's bad. It's bad for themselves too. It's terrible for the whole society, but it's really detrimental on yourself because you're lying to yourself.
Final question. This is a 4-parter, but I promise it'll go by quick. You were asked, who would you put on the Libertarian Mount Rushmore? You said Mises, Rothbard, Paul, and Rand. Starting with Rand, what's the most important thing you learned from or contribution of Ayn Rand?
What I love about Ayn Rand is her whole concept. I mean, obviously she talks so much about capitalism. Like I really tie capitalism to Ayn Rand a lot, but I love how she'll take words and phrases that are usually like demonized and have a negative connotation, and she'll show you that it's not really bad. Like her book, The Virtue of Selfishness, how for me, and I totally relate to that book, if I help someone, it's because I want to help them. I have an interest in helping them. It's not just, if someone like asks me or is like really like trying to force me to help them, that's what's annoying, if they're not like appreciative. But whenever I help someone, it's because I want to. And I really love just her, blunt, raw, just support of being selfish, and that's how we live moral lives. Is if everyone just focuses on themselves and their own well-being, then the whole society will thrive as a whole. Let's stop pretending to live for other people is to live immorally, because you're lying to yourself. Human nature wants to thrive for your own person. We all have our own individual interests. So that, from Ayn Rand, I love the most.
What is the most important thing you learned from Ron Paul?
Ron Paul, I mean, he's just like so good about putting everything so simply in the whole just liberty-minded, I would just say liberty in general. I mean, I've never heard him say anything I disagree with. I'm trying to think if there's any like specific thing besides just his way of messaging being a liberty-minded person. I would just say liberty, I guess. I guess that's really broad, but.
How about Ludwig von Mises?
Ludwig von Mises. Well, as we did our first podcast together, he's so quotable, but he just puts things in such good terms. Like there's like one quote, I think, like socialism is an alternative to capitalism, like something's like cyanide, something like very toxic, but he just puts things in so bluntly. And he has that one book, what's it called, the anti-capitalist mentality, or is that what it's called?
So the anti-capitalist mentality.
I think the way he is really good about talking about socialism and capitalism specifically, and saying what's so immoral about socialism and what's moral about capitalism. So I would say like those two things, like his economics for sure for him.
Finally, most important thing you learned from Murray Rothbard?
God, maybe how the main enemy of us all is the state. His anatomy of the state, just looking at the state as his enemy. Obviously, he was also an economist and had so many great things about that, but I think just he really embodies for me why I look and distrust and just really see the state as like this terrible enemy. So I think he's the best on that.
Well, for anyone wanting to follow Miss Riley, please check out the description below. Links to Twitter, TikTok, Gab, and Parler will be in the description. Thanks to everyone for watching Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone and the Libertarian Institute. And Miss Riley, thank you for being so generous with your time.
Thank you so much for having me on.